This exercise is going to focus on pivot tables, which are an extremely valuable tool in Excel. We're going to use a data set called Fatal Encounters. These are records on people who were killed in encounters with police in Minnesota between the year 2000 and as of when I'm recording this, which is 2021. We at the Star Tribune have been tracking this since 2016. We add new records to this data set anytime someone has died as a result of an encounter with police. So this could be a shooting, tasing. We have an incident where the person was struck by a police vehicle. Most of them, of course, are shootings, but not all of them. And of course, George Floyd is in this data set. This is a CSV file, and when you open it up, it should open up just fine in Excel. You want to, of course, look and make sure nothing is too strange. You might see, for example, here that you're seeing some pound signs in some of these columns. That simply means the columns are not wide enough to display all the information. And if you just go on the top of that column and double click on that column, it will widen it out as you need. And you can see some of these columns are not wide enough for all the information you have here, but we have a lot of stuff here. Anytime you have a CSV file, the first thing you'd want to do is save it as an Excel file. So we're going to go to File and do Save As, and I'm going to change this to Excel Workbook, and I'm going to give it a name. I'm going to date it 2021-10-5 and say Save. So now that CSV file should still be sitting in your directory, and you should have an Excel file with that we're going to now work in. So make sure up at the top it has your new name and .xlsx. All right, so we'll just look quickly at what we have here. There's some information about, we put in here the code from their death certificate record. We put in who's investigating the case. BCA is the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. The last name, first name, middle name, suffix, birth date. Once we get that from their death certificate, their death date, the year that they died, the age, race, and then many of these other things: race, Hispanic, ethnicity, gender, occupation, residence city, residence state, all of that, and then manner of death, whether it was homicide, suicide, etc. All of that comes from death certificate records. We have location, and we put in a latitude and longitude of those incidents, and in case we want to map it someday. And then we are also tracking what region of the state this is occurring in, well, what city where it occurred, the region of the state, whether the person was armed with a weapon, and if so, what kind of weapon, whether it was a traffic stop situation or a car chase situation, what police agency or agencies were involved. And then we have a narrative that gets displayed on our website where we display all of this information in a searchable, quantifiable form. So some of the questions we might want to ask, of course, would be: how many are black? How many are white? How many are men? How many are women? How many live in Minneapolis versus somewhere else? Any of these, the more pieces of information you have about, so let me back up a step. So each row represents a person who died, and the more pieces of information attached to that row that you have, in whatever data set you have, the more questions you can ask it. So the first thing you'd want to do is think about what questions you want to ask your data. And any time that you want to summarize this information, so collapse these people or these rows down into groups based on some common factor, that is where a pivot table is going to come into handy. It's in other computer programs, this is known as a group by situation. Think of it like playing cards, where you maybe you'd put all your hearts together, all your queens together, all your ones, all your fives, etc. Like you'd put them in your hand, kind of in groups. We're going to do the same thing here with data, and then tell it to count how many rows there are in each group. Because each row is a person, that allows us to then say we are counting how many people are in each of those groups. So it's really imperative when you do pivot tables to know what each of your rows represent and make sure that it's consistent across your data set, that each row is a person or an incident or a place or a school or whatever that thing is. Just understanding what it is, that's going to help you interpret your pivot table. All right, let's make a pivot table. Let's look at race. We'll start with that one. How many are white, black, Native American, Hispanic, etc.? Oh, well, Hispanic's in a separate column. We should clarify that. We're tracking Hispanic separately, just like the Census Bureau does. So to do a pivot table, make sure your cursor is somewhere in your data, not out in a blank white space, just anywhere in your data. Go to the Insert menu, choose Pivot Table, and it's going to give you the range of data that it is grabbing. And you just want to spot check this and make sure nothing looks wrong, but this looks about right, 212 rows. It goes all the way over to column AH, all the way over to the right. And then the default is that it's going to put it in a new worksheet, which I highly recommend. So say OK, and now we're on our pivot table creator. So over on the right is, you'll see all the columns in your data set. And this is, it's super important that your columns have a label on them. If you don't have a label, the column will not show up in this list. Like it won't even be there. There'll be nothing. So make sure it has a column. Make sure it's legible, understandable, simple, things that will make sense when you're looking at just these list of columns. And then there's 4 boxes down here: filters, columns, rows, and values. The rows and the values are the only 2 that are required to do a simple pivot table. So let's start with that. So the rows is what you want your groups to be. So in this case, if we want black, white, Native American, etc., those are our rows. And those values are stored in the column called race. So we're going to bring race down here into the rows box. And now we can see the various categories. So this should show you one instance of each unique category that is included in that column. Now you'll notice that, oh dear, we accidentally labeled someone, their race, as Hispanic. Well, maybe more than one. We'll find out here in a minute. But otherwise, this data is consistent. There aren't different variations of multi or black or American Indian or anything like that. If you had dirty data, messy data, unstandardized data, that would show up here, and you would want to fix that before you do this pivot table. We'll proceed here with this Hispanic one as is and just see what we got here. Now you need something to count. You need to count the rows. Because we're not summing a value that is stored in our data set, we can truly put almost any column in this box, including the race one. We could put this over here. I recommend you ensure that you pick something that definitely is filled in for all the rows so that you're not missing any. So let's flip back over to our data set. I'm going to turn my filters on, and I'm going to pull down on race. And you can see that there's no blank ones. It would say blank if there were. So for example, birth date, it's going to show me down here there's blanks on that one. So as long as we're choosing a column that doesn't have any blanks, we're going to be okay. So we can just, I'm going to go back to the pivot table now, which is down here in the sheets, sheet 1. If for some reason your little designer goes away, just click back in this blue and white area over on the left, and it'll reappear. So I'm going to pull race down to the values box as well. And it's automatically going to guess that we want count of race. The reason it did count and not a sum is because this is a character column. It can't sum anything, so it's automatically do count. That is one advantage to choosing a text field to do that. Like if I had chosen age years, it probably would have summed the people, which we wouldn't. We would have summed actually the years, and then you would have had a really strange answer. So you can see here that we have 9 people that we classified their race as Hispanic. Very few with multi-other. We have some pendings and some unknowns that we must not have the death certificates for them yet. And then we have white. So we'll leave this for now. We won't clean it up, but you can see that this might be something you'd want to clean up before you do calculations for a story. So this is telling us how many people, so 118 out of 211. Well, I'd like to know what that is as a percentage. So one thing you can do is you can bring that race column down a second time, and you'll see that it's just repeating the same thing, count of race. But if you go down on that column and click on it, you'll bring up value field settings. Sorry, this box might be a little oh, maybe I can make it bigger. And under value field settings, you have a couple of options. One is here's where you could change it to a sum if you needed to, or maybe an average or a max or a minimum if you are working on a column that has numbers in it. So like campaign finance data, and you have the column that indicates how much money was donated, or you have a budget data set and there's a dollar amount, a column with a dollar amount on it. Then you could sum or average or get the minimum, i.e. the lowest, or the maximum, the highest value for each group. For this one, we're going to leave it at count. But then there's a tab up here called Show Values As. And once you click on that, Show Values As, there's another pull-down menu there where right now it says no calculation. But you can say, change this to a percentage. So you just have to think about what you want the percentage to be. So in this case, I want to know, like the white people, 118 out of 211, which is our grand total, what percentage is that 118 of the grand total? In that, so we can say percent of grand total. The column and row ones come into play when you are doing a cross tabulation, and we will get to that. But for now, let's just do percent of grand total and say OK. And so now we have both a raw number and a percentage. And if you click on the first value in your percentage column, go to the data menu, and there's some sort buttons kind of in the middle of the screen. There's an A to Z and a Z to A. I'm going to choose Z to A. And so you can see that almost 56% of the people who died in fatal encounters are white. If you were going to use this in a story, you would want to contrast that with the share of the population. Minnesota white people are 80-some% of the population these days. So if we look at black, here they represent 26% of the people killed. They make up 6 or 7% of the state's population. So this is a huge disparity. And American Indian as well, their population in Minnesota, they make up about 1% of the population. So even that is a large, exceedingly large share. Asian and well, the Hispanic we know is a faulty number because this is not complete. But the Asian number is about in line with their share of the population, if not even a little bit low. Okay. So it's a good practice to, if you want to save this, maybe name this sheet. So go down to the lower corner, double click on sheet 1, and it'll turn gray. So then you can rename it. So I'm going to name it Race Pivot, and we'll leave that. Now let's go back to the main tab, the Fatal Encounters tab, which has our data. And let's do another pivot table. So make sure your cursor is in your data somewhere, and we will, let's do a gender one. Go to Insert menu, choose Pivot Table. This time we'll choose Gender, and we'll pull it down again to get that count. And you can see that it's very disproportionately male. But the other thing we can do here is we could combine race and gender into a cross tabulation. So let's bring race down into the columns tab. And you'll see now we have a combination of female and male by race. And just for ease of use, we might want to flip this around. So I'm going to put race in the rows box and gender in the columns box. Do you see how this is kind of, it's a good best practice to put the one that has the most things going down in the rows and the one with the least going in your columns. It's a little easier to read. So we can see that there's 1 black female and 6 white females. So very disproportionately white on the female side, but it appears to be very disproportionately black on the male side. But here's where we can do those percentages. And this time I'm just going to change the main display. I'm not going to add a new column. I'm going to go to Count of Gender in the Values box and choose Value Field Settings and Show Values As. Now here's where we can do the percent of column or the percent of row. So you need to think about what it is you want to show. So if we're saying, I want to know what percentage of the women were white versus what percentage were black, then we're talking the percent of the column. If I want to say what percentage of the black people were women versus men, then you would be doing the percent of the row. So let's do percent of column and say okay. And so this should make a lot of sense. You know, almost 86% of the women were white, 14% were black. It's a weird calculation because it's such a small number, just one black person. That's how it shakes out. But then you can see that 26% of the men were black and 55% were white, which lines up a little bit with our overall calculations as well. So we could expand on this. We could take the gender out. So I'm going to just click on it and drag it back up to the list, and it'll just disappear. You can, it's still checked here because it's the count of gender, which is fine. And then let's put in Hispanic ethnicity. So now we can see, and you can see it's still on the percent of column. So we could value field settings that, show values as, put it back to no calculation, just to kind of see things clearly here for a minute. But you can see that we have, for example, 2 of the people who identified as white also identified as Hispanic. And then 1 who identified their race as other. And then you could see there's those 9 people that we classified their race as Hispanic. So they're classified as both Hispanic and in their race and their ethnicity. So again, a little messy data here. Do you change this other and this white one to Hispanic so you just have a single column that encompasses both Hispanic and non-Hispanic? Or do you have it split between the two? But these, doing a pivot table like this is a great way to kind of see how your things are lining up. And, as you can see here, that it also shows you some potential flaws in your data that you might want to address. I should make that a little bigger so you can see it. Okay, so there's more here that you can do. If you go back into Fatal Encounters, here's a couple things you can do on your own. You can calculate how many people died each year. You could do a cross tabulation between the year and the race to see if there are particular years where a greater share of Black people died than in other years, or if that is consistent across time. You can pivot on the region of the state to see how many died in each region, or also do a pivot table on the injury city to see which city had the most fatal encounters. Let's do one more thing. So those are all some pivot tables you can do on your own, but let me show you. I just realized I didn't show you the filter box. So let's start a new filter. We'll do pivot table. Again, it's giving us the default new worksheet. Good. So this time, let's just find all the ones that occurred in Minneapolis. So I'm going to go find injury city and put that in the filters box. Once you do that, you'll see over in the left, let me make this a little bigger for you. There's now a pull-down menu here in the blue with the list of all the cities that appear in that column. So go down to the M's and you should find Minneapolis. Choose Minneapolis, say OK. And now any pivot table we do will only involve the ones in Minneapolis. So let's do the race again, and we'll do a count, and we'll change that to a percentage, show values as % of grand total, just like we did the earlier one. You can see that these are now just the ones in Minneapolis. I'll pull a second instance down so you can see the count. 24 Black people, 5 white. It's a little more, well, it is more skewed Black, but the city of Minneapolis is also a little higher concentration of Black, but not 66%, that's for sure. And the white, it's pretty much the reverse of the actual white and Black populations. In Minneapolis, it's much more stark. So that's how you'd use the filter box. And this filter, you can do more than one thing. So you can say select multiple items. And so, for example, we could say Minneapolis and its sister city, St. Paul, the two cities that are why we're named the Twin Cities. Those are the two biggest cities here. We could include both of them, and you'll see now these numbers have come up slightly, but not by much. And the percentage is adjusted very slightly, but not very different. Now, I could also take this injury city, because it's got the filter on it. If I put this in the columns, you'll see that it's going to break out the Minneapolis and St. Paul. Hold on, I'm going to take one of these race ones out. And we'll just make it raw numbers so we can see no calculation. You can see that there's very few only one in St. Paul, which makes me wonder if something's up with my filter. And you can see the filter is still on here, but in a different spot now because I put it in the columns. Makes me wonder if we're labeling St. Paul differently. There it is. Do you see there's a St. Paul with a period and a St. Paul without a period? There we go. So it's the one without the period that is more common. Again, some more data entry problems that we would need to deal with before we could get an accurate count here.